to the Animal Reiki in Public and Private Practice panel. I love alliteration. My name is Judy Boswin. I'm here moderating at this event. Very excited to do so. I have a couple of announcements before we get started. There's handouts on this table in the back. There's also some Animal Reiki handouts in your folder and at the presenter table that's on the long hallway. So there's lots of wonderful information resources for you. We're going to have question and answers at the end, so if you can think of questions as the panel is speaking, you can have an opportunity at the end of the panel, and then after we finish, we go from 10:30 to 11:30. At 10:30 to 11:30, we end here at 11:30, and the panelists will also have a few minutes to talk to you personally. And there is a CEU sign out. I know some people here. We didn't receive our stamper yet, but that will be coming. So you'll be able to. It might happen again.
I should be coming back.
Do you have the CEU stamper?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks. So there's this CEU people are stamping before and after. So whoever.
Does anybody need a stamp?
Okay, thank you. Okay. I'd like to introduce our panel here. Thank you all for coming. You ready? I have here Kat. Sorry. Kat Forkis. Kat of Bliss Reiki and Animal Reiki is a Japanese Reiki teacher trained by Franz Diener of the International House of Reiki and an Animal Reiki teacher trained by Kathleen Prasad of Animal Reiki Source. Kat loves witnessing joy and freedom develop in her students and clients through the insights of Reiki as a meditation and mindset practice. Kat has led Japanese Reiki and Animal Reiki practicums and Reiki practice sessions at animal shelters and sanctuaries in New England, the Midwest, the Southwest, Europe, and online, since making Reiki and Animal Reiki her full-time focus in 2014. A New England native, Kat currently lives in Bloomington, Indiana. Welcome, Kat. And Kelly McDermott Burns in the center here. Kelly of Heart Song Reiki and Heart Song for Animals has been bringing heart-centered healing to people and animals in Central Vermont since 2006. Kelly was trained in Animal Reiki by Kathleen Prasad of Animal Reiki Source and is a founding and teaching member of the Shelter Animal Reiki Association, the acronym is SARA, which you'll hear more about, serving as their Director of East Coast Operations and the Chair of the SARA Ethics Committee. Kelly is also a graduate teacher of the International House of Reiki, having trained under Franz Diener. Her work with SARA takes her around the Northeast U.S. to train shelter staff and volunteers in the Let Animals Lead method of Animal Reiki. Welcome, Kelly. Kelly's wearing are you wearing a SARA t-shirt? And Nancy Rudman. Nancy Rudman has trained to master teacher level in Animal Reiki with Kathleen Prasad of Animal Reiki Source in the Shelter Animal Reiki Association, SARA. Nancy has also trained master teacher level in Japanese Reiki Ryoho with the International House of Reiki and in the method of Usui Shiki Ryoho. Nancy is a certified spiritual counselor and works with grief and loss support, Reiki ministry, Buddhist healing practices, and shamanic healing practices. Nancy has practiced and taught Reiki and Animal Reiki in Boston and Seattle, Washington. Currently living in Washington State, Nancy brings Reiki to the Paws Cat Rescue and Adoption Center of Bainbridge Island in Kitsap County. Welcome, Nancy. And Linda Crabtree at the end. Linda of Circle of Peace is a Reiki teacher and practitioner and a nationally certified equine acupressure practitioner based in Massachusetts. Linda began the practice of Reiki in 2000 and has trained in Japanese Usui Reiki Ryoho with Fran Steiner of the International House of Reiki and Animal Reiki with Kathleen Prasad of Animal Reiki Source. A retired therapeutic horseback riding instructor for the past 10 years. For the past 10 years, Linda has presented, demonstrated, and taught Reiki at regional and national PATH, Professional Association of Therapeutic Horsemanship conferences. Linda offers classes in equine-assisted activity centers to bring peace, connection, and well-being to the therapy equines and the staff and volunteers. Welcome, and welcome everybody here. Before we begin with our questions and the conversation, I want to read an Animal Reiki statement which gives a little bit of a framework. Animal Reiki is an approach to offering Reiki to animals with openness, respect, and humility, following the animal's lead in how the treatment will unfold. Animal Reiki practices are based in traditional Reiki meditations and mindset practices, offering us opportunities to practice being Reiki with the animal. Animal treatments in this method may involve animal-initiated contact or may unfold at a distance away from the animal without physical contact. And our first question, what are some of the benefits you've witnessed from offering Reiki to animals using these approaches? And Linda is going to take this first.
Is this working? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So using this approach, it keeps, in my personal experience, it keeps me humble in a couple of ways. First of all, when you use Reiki, when you practice Reiki with the animals using this approach, it asks you to let go and trust that the animal is the one that knows what they need and want from the Reiki energy, not me. And it also asks me to let go and trust that the animal will receive whatever that animal needs from the Reiki energy. And then the second part of it is respect. It's respect for the animal's choices, not my choices, right? So it's where that animal wants to have the Reiki session, and first of all, whether or not they choose to want the Reiki. And if they do they choose to have it in my lap, directly under my hands, or do they choose to be 5 inches away from me, no hands-on, 5 feet away from me, 50 feet away? Whatever that animal's choice is, then I must respect that. And so in every animal Reiki session that I offer, it brings humility into it. And then what's really cool is that humility goes over into the other circles of my life with the other animals and the other humans in my life.
Thank you, Linda.
For me, this method fosters relationship and building of trust between the practitioner and the animals. It creates a space of calm and relaxation, allowing animals a refuge from stressful environments. It's a partnership rather than a doing to or me presuming to know what they need. It allows for them to be our teachers, and it keeps us honest, allowing them to do what they need to do, allowing them to take what they need to take, and it holds us to task, pushing us to a depth of focus and practice.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for being here. It's just really wonderful to see so many faces and so many, have so many conversations already today about offering Reiki to animals. And really thank you all for coming and being so invested and interested. Some of the most meaningful aspects for me about this approach of offering Reiki to animals in this way, one of the things that I really love is that I feel like it opens up a lot of opportunities. So we can, using these approaches, we can offer Reiki or share Reiki with animals and other species that we might not have previously thought we could, or maybe hadn't even considered might be an option. So wild animals, any animals that have experienced trauma or might be fearful for some other reasons, have anxiety, that may not want us to walk right up to them and hold them still with our hands. Animals, I always like to think of animals deep in the ocean, where we're not going to be able to go right up to them and just be in contact with them, up in the sky as well. So that's one of the things I love the most. And also one of my favorite examples that people often have a connection with is insects. There's so many creatures around us at all times, and we can actually share Reiki with any of them. One of the other things that I really love the most about this very nice, gentle, soft, almost passive approach to offering Reiki is it really gives the animals the chance to have input into their health process. And I love that, I think you'll hear everyone really bringing that up in different ways throughout this session about the openness that that requires from us in our mindset, the respect that it embodies, and how it really teaches us, I think, to be not only more respectful practitioners, but also more respectful human beings, because we can really, and we'll talk about this a little bit as well, we can really bring this approach into all aspects of our life.
I really don't have a lot to add to that because everybody covered that really well, but I'd say one thing that I love is that it taught me how to let go of expectations and to just be in that space and in a peaceful way, and that has carried on, of course, into my life and outside of my Animal Reiki work and at home and everywhere else, and just being. I love what Kat said. I mean, I had a little F that was coming out of the ground when I was weed whacking, and I was like, oh! And so I put the weed whacker down, I sat down next to it, and just offered Reiki, and it popped its little head out of the hole, and so we have those experiences, like we can always do it, and we don't have to be sitting with our hands on an animal, and I think that's, being able to allow them to receive in whatever way is important for them, and recognizing their own autonomy is just so important. It's an imperative, really, in this practice.
Thank you. How have the approaches of Animal Reiki benefited, changed, or improved your personal Reiki practice or your practice with humans? And Kelly?
Yeah, so that was one thing, but then I do work also with hospice and hospital patients, and I recognize, like, when I would go to the hospital, I try to work around the person and trying to be comfortable, but I'm also not trying to, be invasive, and we had certain rules around where we could be above the body and all that sort of thing. And it occurred to me, well, I can just sit in the space of these people, just like I do with an animal. I don't have to do hands-on. If I can reach their head, good, but if I can't, I could just sit at the end of the bed. And when I had a different way of looking at it that way, then all of a sudden I'd go and visit a hospice patient, and they would, we'd just be connecting through a reading. I might be reading a book or a magazine to somebody and feel that Reiki light just kind of come on, woo, that Reiki light. And so, there's also just recognizing that I don't have to be touching somebody. It's a whole different way of looking at distant Reiki, as we call it. And also knowing how to hold the space, in my own life, again, and how much that spills out into the work that I do at home and with the people, with people with human Reiki, because I do Reiki with humans. So it's an amazing thing and taught me so much. And also, again, letting go of expectations, not, wanting an outcome, and recognizing the person's autonomy just as well as the animals, I mean, people come and they're like, oh, I want Reiki for, this, that, or the other thing, but me not having an agenda makes it a much more beautiful experience for both of us.
Yeah, I love how we can always, I feel like, hear ourselves and others speaking. It's really neat to hear that. I love that hospice example. I think for me, one of the ways that I really interact with Animal Reiki is I felt like the approaches taught me more about Reiki itself So it helped me to really deepen my experience of Reiki itself, of Reiki within myself, and to deepen my practice. And in fact, I think the animals in particular really ask that of us in certain ways that may come through as we continue to talk today. But we get a chance to really experience Reiki in a way that's not about our hands and not about this kind of idea that Reiki flows out through our hands. It becomes our entire way of being, our entire way of life. It's a lifestyle. It's an entire embodied practice. And for me, that was very expansive and transformative, and really became a way that I could then bring that into any interaction that I have. So if I'm at the grocery store and I'm interacting with a cashier, or if I'm sitting on public transit, I can be practicing meditation for myself in a similar way that I would sit next to an animal. I think another aspect here is kind of similar to what I was saying about that it expands our opportunities to work with multiple species. I think this practice can also be brought into a lot of human relationships that we might not be able to offer direct touch, or even close to the person, or even having them lying still on a Reiki table. And of course, our theme this year is Reiki Beyond the Table. So this is a nice, I think, correlation with that. So Kelly's example about hospice is a great one. I'm sure everyone's heard, or most likely has heard about Reiki practitioners being in rooms where surgery is being done, so they're not going to have their hands on the patient, but they can be holding peaceful space perhaps in that opportunity. Other examples I think of often are things like burn victims, or a trauma, a person who's experienced emotional trauma or sexual trauma or some other kind of experience where touch might be very scary for them and stressful. Of course, we don't want to create stress for our clients. We want to help alleviate stress. And then my other favorite way of thinking about it is children, particularly children with special needs, but any child. They might like to move around, and they get to have that free movement the same way that we would encourage an animal to have free movement if we can, so that they can choose the way that they would like to experience this offering of peaceful space and energy.
Linda?
So for me, this method of offering Reiki through meditation, it gave me the opportunity to volunteer at the Healing Garden, which is a cancer support center in Harvard, Massachusetts. And I boarded my horse, Kawa. You'll hear more about him later. I boarded him next door at a barn. And for 1.5 to 2 years, I really wanted to volunteer for the people at the Healing Garden. But I didn't, and I wanted to incorporate the horse because, as Judy mentioned, I taught therapeutic horseback riding for 10 years. And so I saw, I experienced, I lived, I breathed in like the healing of these magnificent beings. And so I wanted to provide that gift to the people at the Healing Garden. But I didn't know how until like 2014, I started taking the classes using this method with Kathleen Prasad. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is how I can volunteer at the Healing Garden. This is so cool. So for 1.5 to 2 years until my horse and I left, we went to another barn. I offered meditation with horses about 2 to 3 times a year, again for 1.5 years. And so we started at the Healing Garden, and we meditated in a circle. And then we walked through a little stroll through the woods that the Healing Garden created so the folks could come over to the barn. And then we stood outside the horse paddocks. And then there were 3 horses that were about 10 feet away from us. But then there were other horses on the upper level, and then there was actually a horse in the pasture that was like a good 100 yards away. And we set our intent that the animals receive whatever they needed, and we began our meditation. And before we left the Healing Garden, we discussed the relaxation signs of horses, so they could observe the horses and absorb and see how that they were effective in how they were receiving and taking in the Reiki energy. So we remained in meditation for about 15 minutes, and again, we didn't have to touch the horses because we were offering it through meditation. And we observed, and then we closed the meditation, and then we talked for a couple of minutes, and they were all women, and they were really quite in awe of being with the horses and seeing how they responded and how they accepted the Reiki energy, and trust me when I say they relaxed, because they did relax. So we talked about that, and then at the end, my horse Kawa, I brought him out of the paddock. He's a gentle soul, and he knows what his job is, and his job is to stand quietly and gentlemanly. And I asked these women, I said, do you want to smell him? Do you want to touch him? Do you want to kiss him? Do you want to give him treats? He's here for you. And he was their gift also. And these women's faces would light up, not only from the meditation, from being up close with Kawa, and a couple of the women actually said being with the horses and meditating with the horses was the best healing modality that I've had yet for my life with cancer. So this approach allowed me to give that gift to them. So I'm hooked, and I won't do it any other way.
Thank you.
For me, this method of Animal Reiki, it deepened and improved my focus with animals and humans because the animals let you know when you're not present. There's no question. And it also forced me to learn to focus when not in a calm environment, when it's noisy, when it's chaotic, when it's upsetting, there are a lot of distractions. And also to have to do this with your eyes open. So it brings a whole new level to being in a meditative space. And to echo the hospice hospice issue and the importance of this, it also taught me how to offer comfort without having to touch or do anything active. In hospice, or when people or animals are in severe pain, touch and even sound can really magnify their pain. So animals have shown me that Reiki is something we can offer in these situations.
Thank you, Nancy. What can you do as an animal Reiki practitioner to help an animal who doesn't seem to want the Reiki? And Nancy?
Okay. Sometimes animals just don't want Reiki, period. This is a story about a horse who definitely wanted Reiki, but not in the way that I was offering it to him. So I had the opportunity to spend a couple of days at Brighthaven Animal Sanctuary and Hospice offering Reiki. So the middle of the first day, I offered to 3 horses in a paddock. All 3 very readily came over to me and they drank up the Reiki space. And then one of them walked right up to me and put his nose up to my right hand. So I thought, okay, this means he wants to be touched. And because I hadn't been around horses for so long and I so badly wanted to touch him, that I put my hand on his nose. And he whipped his head around. He was obviously eating myself up, saying, oh, why did I do that? I shouldn't have done it. I should have known better. And I stepped into Reiki space and said, I will have compassion for myself. So at the end of the afternoon, I went back to the paddock to apologize and to offer Reiki again, knowing that this time I'd only touch him if he initiated the touch. So this time, when he pushed his nose right into my palm, I thought, oh, well, he definitely wants to be touched because he's pushing into my palm. So I put my hand on his nose again. Same thing. He whipped his head around and stormed off. So I'm like, oh. So it was still my own agenda, right? So I apologized again and left for the day. So at the end of the second and final day there, I went back, apologized again, and tried one more time to offer Reiki space. So I went into the Reiki space, I let go of any desire to touch the horse, and I had my mantra to myself was, I am not moving a muscle, no matter what this horse does. So it took a while, but he finally came back over to me. And so the horse then put his muzzle in my right hand, and he pushed against my palm, and then he was wiggling his nose around until he got my baby finger in one nostril and my thumb in the other nostril with my palm on his nose. And he closed his eyes and stood there for about 2 minutes. Then he slowly backed away and stepped over to my left side and did the exact same thing with my left hand. So after a few minutes, he was satisfied and he just slowly walked away. So he knew exactly what he wanted. And so it's good to check ourselves sometimes.
Thank you, Nancy. Linda?
Okay, well, mine's really like not that endearing what I have to say, but it's practical information and suggestions. So if I find that an animal is not wanting Reiki or it's not digging the Reiki, then I check in on 3 things. I check in on myself, I check in with the animal, and I check in with my environment. So when I check in with myself, I ask myself, am I trusting the Reiki process? Am I looking for a particular outcome? So I look at those questions, and then I think about my body. Are my eyes soft and relaxed, or are my eyes hard and glaring and staring? And then I think about tension in my face and in my body. Do I feel tense? Are my shoulders raised? And what really goes a long way with helping the body relax is to smile, because that immediately relaxes our face and it relaxes our body. And then I think about my breathing. Am I breathing from my belly? Am I doing deep belly breathing? Or has my breathing moved up to here into my chest where I now have shallow breathing? So I'm losing my focus, right? I'm not providing that open space of love and healing using my breath. Then I think about my voice. Am I talking with the animal in a soothing, calming way? Or is my voice going up like this for whatever reason, right? Which brings angst to the animal, right? So that's how I check in with myself. And then I check in with the animal. I look at the animal's body language. I look at the animal's behavior. Is the animal showing signs of anger, fear, anxiety? Is the animal running around in circles? Is it the tongue hanging out? Is it yipping? So I look at that behavior and I think, okay, I'm going to step further back from that animal. I'm going to turn my position away from the animal, because a lot of times if you face an animal head on, especially if they're not used to the Reiki energy, sometimes it can be overpowering. So I shift my angle, I shift my body so the energy is not going right towards them. So that's how I check on the animal. I check in to see what type of emotions that they're carrying. Then I check in with my environment. Is the animal not wanting it because is it noisy? Like all of a sudden, did a truck pull up next door and they're hammering nails next door, and so the animal is now unable to accept the Reiki energy and be with the Reiki energy? Or has the phone been ringing a lot? So those are the 3 things that I check in with. Is myself, the animal, and the environment.
Thank you, Linda.
So sometimes animals just don't want Reiki that day, and we have to honor that. And it doesn't mean that because they don't want it that particular day, they may not want it another time. And one of the things that I see quite often with the dogs at the shelter is, they're in there, sometimes they're in these small kennels, especially it's hard in the winter because they can't go outside as often. We had a lot of snow this year and ice, and so they were starting to become a little kennel crazy, and so it's really, it can be distracting for us too, but I always bring earplugs. And following what Linda said, I mean, that's her points are really right on there, but sometimes we just have to walk away and maybe go in another room where they can't see us and, offer Reiki from another room. And again, letting go of the idea that we have to be a distant practitioner. We can certainly sit in another room and meditate, bringing that animal into the meditation and offering Reiki that way. So don't limit yourself to not doing Animal Reiki because you feel like, well, I'm not a level 2 practitioner and I don't do distance Reiki. Technically, we're all doing distance Reiki the minute we start doing Reiki with an animal because we're not touching them. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like I really can just, essentially affirm everything that everyone is sharing, and really recognize that in my own experiences and practice too. I might just add a couple little things, or bring them in, again. One of the things that I'm hearing that kind of is a nice thread is this idea of going a little bit indirect with our focus. So we have a lot of different principles that are getting mentioned here, and I think they all interrelate. But when we're being a little too focused on the subject that we're sitting with, what we might call our healing partner, it can feel kind of intense. It can feel like a little bit of pressure for them to perform for us. And of course, that's not what we want this relationship or interaction to be about at all. So I think that's a great reminder, like everyone else has said, to check in with our own intentions in that moment. And if we notice that the animal seems uncomfortable, resistant, not willing, maybe it's not necessarily about them, but maybe we can adjust some things in the way that we're offering this practice. And I also wanted to mention that we have a code of ethics that we follow, and all of these principles actually really come through really clearly in this Animal Reiki Code of Ethics, and there's a copy of it for you in the back of the room. So I just wanted to let everyone know that you can pick up a copy of that and see a lot of these principles. I think it's a beautiful code of ethics. It's very detailed and just very rich, has a lot of great info.
Thank you, everyone. What would you recommend for someone who wants to get started with offering Reiki in specialized settings, such as therapy animals or other working animals, animals in rescue settings, or animals in captivity? Kelly?
So I volunteer at Rutland County Humane Society in Vermont, and I've been doing it for 10 years almost. And I made an appointment with the volunteer coordinator, and I went in and visited with her. And I didn't do Reiki with her dog or anything or any of the animals at the shelter, but I went in and I had materials with me, and I talked about what we do with the Shelter Animal Reiki Association and how we train staff and how we want to see Reiki in all the shelters so that we can, help shelter staff and animals, especially staff, who need it so much. So just talking to her about it, her dog was laying next to us on the floor and was up and down, and I said, can I offer you just some chair Reiki if you've never had it before? And she was open to that. So while we were standing, she was sitting in the chair, I was just behind her doing some Reiki on her shoulders and stuff, and her dog just was pacing, it was just like settled down, and she said, oh my gosh, I can't believe my dog just settled down with you in here. And so she was willing to have me come in as a volunteer. And over the years, I've done a lot of other things for them. I go in if they need extra help, I wash dishes, I teach classes there now, and I always donate back. If I have my practice groups, I do that. So we can bring something to the table besides just coming in and doing something like Reiki that can be kind of frightening to some groups or some people. And just keeping a low profile for me, I was like, I'm not going to come in and heal your animals. I'm going to come in and I'm going to offer this peaceful meditation. And if you have any specific animals you think might benefit from that, I'm happy to do that. So I think one of the things that I found most important when trying to get people to volunteer at shelters is that some rules are basically you have to be diligent. If you're going to go in, you can't go in and say, I'm going to come in and work with your animals every week and then not show up. So, and I see that across the board. It's not just with Animal Reiki and shelters, but hospitals and everything else, where if we make a commitment, it's important for us to show up. I mean, sometimes we're on the borderline of whether people are willing to let us in or not, and when we're not, really standing up and saying, yes, I'm going to be reliable, and I treat it like a job, even though I don't get paid. But it's important for us to go in and be friendly and not get involved in staff issues, which can be quite quite a lot of that. Not getting involved in whether they euthanize or anything like that. Going in, sitting quietly with the animal, offering Reiki to the staff if they feel like, you see somebody who looks like they might need it, or just offering in general. If you ever need some Reiki, we're here. That's one of the ways that Sarah has done so well.
Thank you, Kelly.
I think zoos are a great place to start. To get practice, they're readily available, and you can learn to think a lot differently about being at a zoo. The animals didn't ask to be there. It's noisy, they're not in their natural habitat, they're stressed, they're bored. Spending time with them in Reiki space can be so rewarding, and sometimes it's the only real connection that they're going to have with someone. So you're offering them an opportunity for something they may never otherwise have, which is a healing, stress-free space that they can rest into. And regarding shelters or sanctuaries, some shelters will invite you in just to offer Reiki, and some will only invite you in to do the volunteer work that's needed and not for Reiki. So if a shelter or sanctuary invites you in, then agree, if they won't invite you in for Reiki, then agree to do the volunteer work. Reiki is a way of being, and if you're grounded and strong in your own practice, then you're bringing Reiki into that environment. So being Reiki, as you wash dishes, as you clean crates, as you scoop litter, as you walk the dogs, do what you have to do. Your presence of being Reiki will still impact the animals and the surroundings, and create the stress-free environment that they need. So modeling Reiki, being Reiki, is still creating that environment of calm, peaceful refuge, so that they can step out of that anxiety, not only the animals, but the staff and the volunteers as well. So be consistent and be patient. When they get to know and trust you, and to know that you care about the animals, and to know, like Kelly said, that you're going to show up, then they're going to be more open to considering having you just there to offer Reiki, as a sole practice.
Thank you, Nancy. Linda, did you want to add something?
I'm advocating offering Reiki to the therapy equines at Equine Assisted Activities and Therapy Center. So ditto exactly what Nancy and Kelly, what Nancy and Kelly said. Yeah, sorry about that. Is put your time in however you need to put your time in at the therapy center, whether or not you're volunteering in a lesson, whether or not you're helping administratively, whether or not you're helping muck stalls, whether or not you're helping to clean water, whatever it is that you're doing, be Reiki, and give them time to get to know you and what you're all about, and then you can slowly work your way into offering Reiki to the equines.
Thank you.
So I just want to offer a quick thought about specific to people who might be interested in volunteering as a Reiki person, as a Reiki practitioner, and just affirming that that is possible. And it can take a little bit of practice and special luck and connections that can form. This might be a relationship you already have with someone who has a facility, or it could be that you're doing cold calling, cold emailing. But I can just affirm from my own, just diving in and trying it, that really can work out, and you can get to be received well and get to experience that experience from the inside. And I think the reason I want to just really affirm that that is possible for everybody is because one thing, I really believe in Reiki as a legitimate professional practice. And I feel like sometimes we are maybe still a bit tentative in thinking of it on the same level as other practices that people might offer to animals professionally. And so I think we can gain some confidence, and just that nice quiet confidence, not an ego confidence, of course, but just that really gentle inner knowing that this is worthy and valid. And I also want to share that one of the really beautiful things is getting to hear the testimonials and feedback that's just organically offered back to us from the staff and volunteers after we're there. So I'll take my students in and we'll practice at shelters. And it'll be the first time I've ever been there. It's the first time any of them have ever been there. We've only had email conversations sometimes, and then they'll tell me, oh my gosh, all my staff and volunteers were coming to me. This would be the volunteer coordinator, will send me an email after and say they were all noticing how quiet the cats were getting or how peaceful the dogs were, and they're just thrilled to get to witness that. So we get to have some really neat testimonials back, but that just affirms for us that it's worth doing.
Thank you. We're on our final question. Can you share a favorite transformation story from the instance of sharing Reiki with animals using this method? And Kelly? Yes, and we, being concise would be our...
Thanks for the warning.
Concise, yes. Thank you.
So a couple of years ago, I went to India for the Shelter Animal Reiki Association, and we were working at an organization called TOLFA, Tree of Life for Animals in India. And I went with a colleague who had been there before, and so we were walking around the facility, and she said, you know, we went to the dog area, and there's a puppy house. And she said, oh, let's go in here. So I went in, and you know, there were puppies in various, different conditions. Some of them were actively dying. And I, feel like if I hadn't been grounded, there was no way I could have done that. And I went in and I started, working with some of the puppies, and I had one in particular I loved to work with who, they were just feeding, while it was slowly dying. And euthanasia was not allowed in that area, and they don't have the sanitation that we have here. So, it was really pretty frequent that animals were passing, especially the little ones. And I was doing Reiki, and I turned around. There was a dog on the floor, so I did some Reiki with that dog, and I went over in here, did another, worked with another animal, came back, and that first dog had passed. And I went out to get somebody, and I saw my friend outside the door, and I just looked at her and burst into tears. And she said, "You're gonna be all right." So what I took from that is that, being grounded, being able to be present with these animals and seeing them, like that taught me how to see these animals in some of their last days without any agenda, just holding the space for them was so precious to me, and such an incredible lesson. And when I came home, there was an animal at Rutland County that had come in as a stray and was dying. And they asked me to go back and just sit with that cat, and I did that. And taking those lessons from, the little puppies in the puppy house, and really knowing that we all want to be seen, whether we're animals or people, and that, being present without any agenda, without any expectations, without trying to fix. And just like Nancy was saying, being Reiki was so incredibly powerful for me, and I'll never forget that lesson.
Thank you, Kelly.
My story's a little lighter than Kelly's, and quick. I worked with a group of 3 kittens at one of the cat rescues where I offer Reiki. And they were all in the same unit together, and they were about 6 months old, a little bit less. And I looked at them, I watched them, and they were totally out of control. It reminded me of when a toddler has a meltdown, and they have no control over themselves anymore. So they were wired, they were out of control, they were crying incessantly, throwing themselves at the window to the unit, throwing themselves at each other, and I was really concerned they were going to hurt themselves or hurt each other. So I just checked myself, dropped into my Reiki space. 1 minute in, the first kitten just falls on the floor sound asleep. The second minute in, the second one just curls up with that one, both of them sound asleep. The third one was the most wired and crazed, and took a bit longer, but 5 to 6 minutes in, just laid down, curled up. The 3 of them were sound asleep on the bottom of the unit and looking like angels.
Thank you.
So I'll just tell the kind of short and sweet version of this story. And And the reason I share this one is it is really demonstrative, but I think it's important to know that a lot of the times when we're offering Reiki to an animal, we don't actually see transformation in the moment, which of course all circles back to us letting go of expectations and desires and trusting and just being so content with getting to share this incredible space of what feels to me like unconditional love that goes way beyond verbal language and experience. But occasionally we do actually get to witness transformation taking place in even that half-hour session, which is, of course, I think all of us know how incredible that can feel. So there was, I live in southern Indiana, and there is a veterinarian there near me who runs a horse sanctuary now. And she and I have a relationship where I can go and take my students there and we can practice Reiki with the horses. And he sent me an email one day and said, I've been brought a tortoise that someone found out in the woods, and we're finding a sanctuary for him to live, but in the meantime he's here, and he hasn't been eating. Would you like to come and maybe offer him some Reiki? And she really comes from the kind of conservative medical side, so she's willing to let the Reiki happen. I thought that was a nice moment as well as she invited this. The session, I go and she demonstrates for me how he won't take food. So she had some nearby and offered it to him, and he was not interested. I sat with him, we opened his little kennel door so he could come out, and during this half an hour, he very slowly, as tortoises do, came out, started to make a circle and go back into his kennel the other direction. And I thought, well, that's okay, that's interesting. He's just turning around. And then I hear a little noise, and I'm curious, and it's dark in there, so I kind of lean in gently and look, and he's got some lettuce in the back of his kennel that he's happily chewing on during the session. So I reached up, and he now turned around again towards me, and I reached up for the other food, which is a little carrot, and offered it to him, which normally I wouldn't feel the need to do that, but I just felt like, let's see if he's interested, and he just went to town on this carrot. So I was so happy for him. I felt so blessed to get to witness this.
Thank you, Kat. So Linda, your story, 2 minutes.
Oh, the pressure. The pressure.
It's a wonderful story.
This is a story about the first class that I taught teaching this method of offering Reiki through meditation. Later on that day, they had brought their dogs, so we practiced offering Reiki to the dogs. And then at the end of the day, I said, you know what? Yeah, and this is where my horse comes in. I said, my horse Kawa is just down the road. Does any of you want to go offer Reiki to my horse? Most of the students who could, they came with. So there were 7 of us total. Stood outside the paddock gate. Kawa was right there because he lives outside 24/7. And we said, we're here to offer you Reiki, can we come in? Well, he didn't say no. So we walked in, we gathered in a circle, and when you offer meditation, there's no leads, there's no halter, there's no lead rope. Kawa is able to move wherever he wants to go, right? So we were getting ready to start meditation, we set our intent, and all of a sudden Kawa comes over and he puts his head right by me like this, checking in. And I said, yeah. I said, this Reiki's here for you. Take whatever you need. And I said, you're our teacher, and you do whatever it is that you need to do. And he turned around and he beelined it for the woman that a few hours previously had said that she needed grounding. And he laid his head on her shoulder, and I don't know if you guys have ever held up a horse head, extremely heavy. He put his head on her shoulder and remained there for a couple of minutes, and I'm over there just like, oh! This is just so awesome! And then he put his head on her head. And then she wrapped both of her arms up and over his neck, and they remained in that peaceful, healing place for 2 to 3 minutes. Then he removed his head, he crossed the circle, beelined it towards me, came right up to my head again, and I said, you done good. I said, you are a rock star, thank you for being our teacher. And so that is my transformation story.
Thank you so much, Linda. We have time for questions, and I'll come down with the microphone.
about, if you're working on a cute doggy and it can't settle down, walking away and offering Reiki from another room. So if you present that, if you're actually working in a doggy's house and their owner is there, how do you explain this to the owner? Because then they're like, well, she's in the other room and my dog's over here, and like, what am I paying for because I don't get this? So how can I tell my client's owner, you know, what's good wording to say?
Well, I often tell them, I think one of the first things I do anyway is tell them how the session's what it's gonna look like, and invite them to be present with the animal and me, or, you know, be in the room with the animal as long as they're not interacting. And just, if the animal comes to them, of course they can pet them, but sometimes it just works that way. I had a dog that went around into the hallway, and when I worked on her, I just stayed where I was, and the owner was fine with that because I had explained to her that sometimes they wander around, and that's okay. The next day I came, the dog sat in front of me, so it was a different way of receiving. So yeah, just giving them the information beforehand, and then also recognizing that sometimes they're just not interested at that time, and rescheduling the appointment. You know, I never charge for that, and I'll just say, you know, we'll make another appointment at a different time.
Thank you. Another question?
Morning. I heard a lot of your sharings about communicating with the animals energetically and through body language and things. I haven't heard anybody talk about communicating psychically. You know, there's animal communicators out there. Is that part of the training that you do? What do you think of that aspect of communicating psychically or getting information verbally? Is that too much doing?
So animal communication, that's not part of the training. In my experience and what I've heard from other Reiki practitioners, and these gals might have something else to say, is that when you go into that quiet space, and the more that you practice Reiki, and the more that you follow the 5 precepts each day, then when you're with that animal in that quiet space, your intuition becomes stronger and stronger, and a lot of times you can pick up what that animal is thinking. But it's not part of the practice is not animal communication. That's something totally separate than offering Reiki. Does that answer your question?
Anyone else want to contribute to that?
I'll just say that, you know, they're different in the sense that Reiki is a very passive, quiet. You're not doing anything. You're being in that space. And animal communication is a very active process. So they're very different.
Any other questions?
When you're making an initial contact with an animal and you want to warm up to the animal, like the horse story with the animal with putting the muzzle in the hand and then touching the nose and he pulls off, do you ever offer treats? My experience with horses is they like treats. You put your hand, you put the muzzle in the hand, you don't offer the treats, but you want to love that, they're going to go. But if you have a treat offer, that might be a way of warming up faster the animal and having the animal more receptive to sharing its emotional experiences with you.
Actually, I think that's a really great question. I'll be really interested to hear what other perspectives might be in general, and it might vary with specific animals. They might respond in a different way, and we might have a different choice that we would make. In general, what I practice and teach with people is we actually kind of keep feeding time separate and play time separate, so that the animal has a chance to kind of really focus on the offer of Reiki energy. I can imagine where there might be a specific instance in which that could help build trust or affection or understanding. But that's kind of in general. Some animals are very food motivated, and once the food is there, they may never think about anything but the food. So the one exception to that I know all of us, we chatted about previously together, is in shelter and sanctuary settings where animals have experienced, fear, loss, they're between homes. Food is often present for them at all times, and their appetites can often be suppressed from stress. So we actually leave the food there, and it's always available. And one of the things we actually have all noticed is when we're offering Reiki in a shelter setting, the animal often will experience a better appetite, and they'll go and eat during the session, which is great.
Yeah, I agree with Kat. I like to just build the trust with the animal without any, drawing them in, and just, holding my space and letting them be in their space.
We have time for one more question. Is that it? Okay. Thank you. If anybody wants to hang out and talk, have a personal question, there's a few minutes after the panel. There's 15 minutes between now and the next event. There's a 15-minute break for bathroom, grab a snack.